BEYA STEM Conference presents High Tech Sunday. On today's episode of High Tech Sunday, our hosts, Dr. Vaughn and Lango Deen, sit down with wealth advisor Davyd Jones. Up first is Corning Incorporated's Manager of Technical Talent Pipelining, Dr. Vaughn. Next is Career Communication Group's Senior Technology Editor, Lango Deen. Finally, our esteemed guest, Davyd Jones. As a wealth advisor, Jones serves the current and future financial needs of the long-term investor with a specific focus on efficient income planning strategies. The former 2010 Ball State University football team captain and four-year letterman has shifted his passions and dedicated himself to a life of service and giving back. If he isn't back in Muncie, serving on Ball State's Black Alumni Constituent Society board, Jones is volunteering in his community or speaking at events across the country. And without further delay, High Tech Sunday, featuring Dr. Vaughn and Lango Deen.
Thank you so much, Brandon, and welcome again, everyone, to this episode of High Tech Sunday. Such a pleasure to have the opportunity to spend some time with you, and certainly with today's guest, Davyd Jones. How are you, Mr. Jones?
I'm doing well. Definitely excited to be here and to speak with you and get to know you and hopefully provide value to everyone listening.
Looking very much forward to it. And today's conversation is, just like all the others, one that I believe is such a pivotal and mission critical one for the times that we're in, the relationship between Blacks and finance. So, we've got a lot of questions, but I really enjoy the opportunity to learn a little bit about each of our guests' journeys. So want to take a moment and have you indulge us by giving us a bit of your bio. So how would you answer the question, who is Davyd Jones?
Davyd Jones is, for one, he's a God-fearing man. He's a husband. He's a father, and he just loves to serve his community in any way that he can. I've taken the liberty of helping folks save their money and helping them grow their capital as efficiently as possible. But I'm just a man here to serve and give back as much as I can.
Thank you so much. And I try to take away headlines from the different comments that our guests share. A man here to serve. That is such a powerful headline, especially in the day that we are finding ourselves in. We need that so importantly in our society today. When you think about your journey to this point in your career, in your mission, what's your background? How did you get into the field of finance and helping people with respect to their personal wealth portfolio establishment? Where'd you grow up, and how did all of that come about?
Yeah, so I grew up in Muncie, Indiana. I was born and raised. I grew up in the church. God, I can't express my background enough, but definitely worked most of my life. I remember growing up and, every Saturday morning waking up in the back of the dump truck, getting ready to go mow lawns and just work hard and make a good day's living. But, from Muncie, Indiana, definitely a lot of cornfield there in Muncie is where we played football. But yeah, went to Ball State University, played football with Ray, and enjoyed football. I love football, and kind of stumbled onto this career.
We'll have to see if we can pull Ray aside and find out if he has any stories that may not come up in the broadcast, but we'd still want to hear about anyway. You mentioned that spirituality and your relationship to God has been very important to your life, even from your youth. Can you say more about that? How has your relationship with God actually informed and influenced the work that you do and even the path that you've taken?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was born and raised in Muncie. My father was a pastor. So when I mentioned born and raised in the church, most of my memories growing up as a kid was in the church, being around those folks, seeing how one serves his or her community, and building relationships and helping folks in a very intricate part of their life. So yeah, hopefully that answers it for you, Dr. Vaughn.
Absolutely, and we'll loop back to that throughout the conversation. But when you think about how it is that you've had that personal experience, literally, it seems like all your life, and then you look at the field of finance. How did that all come about? When did you know that you wanted to have a career in finance? And I guess equally importantly, when did you realize that you wanted to take what you have learned in finance and actually serve people with it?
Yeah, so to answer that first question, which is a very interesting question, um, my senior year of football, my goal in life, Dr. Vaughn, was to play in the NFL. That's all I thought about. And my senior year, a good teammate of mine, who's also a friend of mine, was in the industry helping folks, mostly teachers and state employees, retired through the state, helping them set up 403B plans and retirement plans through the state. And he, we've always been close. So he pulled me to the side and says, look, if the NFL route doesn't work out for you, I believe you'll do well in this specific career. His values are very similar to mine. So he believed, as he expressed to me, that the way that I treat people and care for people will really, correlate very well to this industry. I've always loved understanding money. As most are aware in the Black community, the relationship between wealth creation, stocks, bonds, investing isn't really talked about as much as it should be. So learning more about it definitely intrigued me, and I just dove right in once I got into the career of really understanding how to help steward folks' lives, this intricate part of their lives, as best as I can.
Got it. And so when you think about what we heard shared in the intro and how it is that you even continue, even to this day, remain very active in your community. So it's not just that you are this finance expert who has clients and you're meeting with them and helping them to establish their portfolios and so on, but you're volunteering and active in the community. And we even heard spending a lot of time volunteering with a career communications group at their events. Why is this giving back and helping others so important to you? It sounds like it's beyond just a job.
It's beyond a job, Dr. Vaughn. It's who I am. Sometimes I ask myself, why do I want to, help out so much, I guess. But, in the book of First Peter's, it does talk about, God's grace and, us being of service to others and to our communities. And that's really just, a part of who I am. I can't, better explain that, but it's very biblical in my theology, at least, of service. Everything in life gives something, and I'm just one of that. I'm of that same mindset of giving and of service.
And so if we continue to pull on that thread a bit, you kind of teed this up a moment ago when you were speaking of communities of color, the Black community in particular, and financial knowledge. Can you kind of give us like a 101 moment? What is the relationship between African Americans, Blacks, communities of color, and finance?
Wow. I think, for one, you got to at least go back to, during the end of the Civil War, when Congress in 1865 established the Freedmen's Bureau. Their specific goal was, look, we're going to have a lot of, freed slaves and poor individuals in this system. How do we best help them in this new system, this new platform that they're going to be in? In America, the system is really lending and borrowing. And if you don't understand how money works, how the lending and borrowing pieces of the system work, you're not going to thrive well. It's almost in sports, or even in your own faith or your own religion. You may be very talented in what you do for a living. You may be very talented in what the natural gifts and talents that you were born with. But if you don't know how to play the game, right, the likelihood of you succeeding in what given sport or what given game will be very unlikely. So it really goes back to understanding the Freedmen's Bureau, understanding the creation of the Freedmen's Bank and our relationship between banking, saving, and investing. There's a reason why my grandma still hides money, in behind her TV or inside a wall or something. Why is that? Why is it that in the middle income gaps of income earners, Black people are excelling the fastest, but in the wealth divide, it's growing rapidly, meaning we're making a lot more income, right? But we don't have as much savings, we don't have as much equity. So we're not really a part of the growth of this system because we don't fully understand the rules of the game or the game itself. And I think that's a huge disconnect. And as you asked me before, I got into this career, and typically when you are starting your own business, you immediately go to your immediate network, your immediate friends and family members. And my immediate friends and family members was those folks in the church, those folks who drove the SL 550, right? Who you thought had a lot of wealth, right? But when you sit down with them and you go over how you can bring value to their lives, there's a huge disconnect in regards to wealth. One may have $50,000 in a 401k, but that 401k has a $20,000, $30,000 loan against it, and they want you to help them retire in 3 years, and they want to travel to Hawaii twice a year, right? So there's a huge disconnect with the value of money, understanding money, and where that learning came from. And historically, every time a Black community created wealth, that wealth was stolen from them, taken from them. You can go back to Greenwood, one of the wealthiest communities in the country, right? Was thriving, and the government sent in bombs for the most part, and destroyed that community. A major source of revenue coming through the 80s and the early 1900s was means of transportation. If you own a boat, if you own a route where packages are delivered, right? You own commerce. Those routes were taken from us, right? If you look at the green belt here in America, there was a mass exodus from the green belt. What's all there now in the Atlanta area, right? Corporations, and we didn't benefit from that. So just trying to connect the history behind it, trying to connect the era of the Reconstruction times, and trying to piece it all together and understanding the theology and how we behave, and trying to educate folks going forward. Understanding the past will educate us going forward. Long-winded answer. Hopefully that was helpful, though.
It's very helpful. And I was getting a little nervous when you started describing that person who wants to retire in 3 years and travel to Hawaii and all of that. I was like, who told him about me? But anyway, I think that this is really important information. So let's just back it up, because you started sharing some financial terms that I don't think many of us may necessarily know how to distinguish. You mentioned wealth, but you also mentioned equity. Can you help us understand the difference between those two?
Wealth is relative, for one, right? I may consider myself wealthy, but I'm looking at my family, the health of my kids, especially now in 2020. I'm valuing wealth differently. But in equity is ownership, right? In the system of America, what do you own? And is what you own appreciating within time? Is at least keeping pace with inflation? Inflation is just the cost of goods and services, for the most part, a very watered down explanation of it. But how much is the cost of things growing in the future? And is your assets, your equity that you own, is at least keeping pace or outpacing that inflation? Wealth is relative. A lot of folks value wealth differently, but in regards to equity, it's what you own. So if you have a house, if you have a mortgage, and your house is worth 100,000, but the mortgage is only 50,000, then that difference, that $50,000 difference of the 100,000 and 50 is the equity. It's your ownership of what you actually own. The bank doesn't own it. They really own your house, but there's a lien on the house, but that's your ownership. If you there's things called stocks or bonds. If you own ownership in something, that is considered equity, right? So hopefully that explains that for you.
It does, and it kind of touches on a bit of something else that you said. You mentioned that as a community, people of color, again, Blacks, African Americans in particular, I think, are making more income, but there's not the gap between income and wealth or equity is still growing. And so that speaks to maybe savings and what the difference is between savings and investing. And is there one or the other that you advise people to actually focus on?
So depending on where one is at in life, will depend on where a lot of your focus should be. Saving is you're taking discretionary income and you are storing it in usually a bank or a money market type of instrument to where the money is easily accessible. You put $1 somewhere, it may get you 1%, but theoretically that $1 is going to be $1 a year from now. That is savings, right? You're probably saving for something where you need that money readily available without any risk to that $1 that you are putting to the side. Example, I want to buy a house in 3 months. I need a 20% down deposit for that house. The value of the house is going to be $100,000. I need to save $20,000 over 3 months, right? I'm putting, $10,000 away of cash in the bank. That's considered savings. Investing, Dr. Vaughn, is when you're taking your discretionary income. So you make $10,000 a month or $2,000 a month. Your expenses are $1,000. That difference of your expenses is discretionary income. What's left over after you paid all your expenses? What are you doing with that $1,000? You can save it, like I just expressed, or you can invest it. Investing is positioning your savings in a place that is growing for you. It's gaining interest. Okay, so it's accumulating compounded interest over time. Compounded interest means, in layman's terms, you buy something for $10. Someone else values that same thing you bought for $10 for $12, right? Someone else values it for $15. Someone else values it at $16, and over time, the value of what you purchase an investment for $10 is now trading for $20. Okay, that's investing, to where you are taking your savings and putting it and buying something with it, purchasing something with it, and it's accumulating over time for you. So in my example, you bought something for $10, and in time it grew to $20. That is investing. You're buying and positioning your savings in a place that is accumulating for you over time. Versus savings, you're positioning your money, your discretionary income, in a place to where there's more certainty in the value of it over time.
That was great and very helpful. Thank you so much. You mentioned earlier I don't know if the right phrase is the devastating backlash that has been experienced in the past as people from communities of color have been successful at accumulating wealth. You mentioned Greenwood, Black Wall Street, and what happened in that dark moment in our country's history. Are there similar obstacles to people in communities of color actually growing wealth and building equity today? And if so, what are the primary ways that you would suggest that folks actually overcome or avoid those?
Gosh, there's so many. that's a heavy question for one, because there's a lot of obstacles, right? You can look at politics and legislation, at top of mind, given where we are at now in the political environment. I typically lean right on economics and the lack of understanding economics in a community. We can easily use our purchasing power to help one another grow a business and do the same thing that other communities do or other minority communities do. But we don't do that, right? Because we don't have a good understanding, for one, of economics, two, where it is our history, where it is we're from, because we're basically all scattered across the country and bought and sold here historically. But I usually, Dr. Vaughn, lean on the understanding of economics and the understanding of the system that we live in. And we put limits on our dreams, right? I believe the graveyard is one of the richest places in the history of the world, because so many people go to the grave with a dream and a vision, and they either don't have the understanding, they lack confidence. Then there's obviously other obstacles in the way, but typically a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge is usually limits one's ability to grow. So me and Ray played football at Ball State University. We played defense. Before the game, we spent a lot of time in film and in study, right? And the coaches put together a game plan for us. If we studied correctly and we understood the game plan and we understood our competition and we understood the game well, then when we go to play the game, typically, we're not thinking too much and making mistakes. We are reacting with the game, and the flow of the game goes so much smoother. There's a reason why Ray Lewis, one of the most famous linebackers that played in the NFL, played for such a long time. He understood the game. So someone may run a 4-2 and Ray's running a 4-4, a 5-4, right? And he's weighing 300 pounds or something crazy. But he was able to get to the spots before the other person who ran a 4-2 because he understood the game, right? And I think with us as a whole, there are segments in our country where folks obviously understand the game and they are thriving and doing very well. But macro, if you look at it, the macro piece, a lot of folks just don't understand the game. They don't understand economics, and they don't understand the lending and borrowing system that we're living in.
And so, as you were speaking, and you were really zeroing in on knowledge, I thought about Hosea 4:6. I too am a pastor, by the way, and so every now and then, when somebody inspires the word, I just have to go there. It is Sunday in our title, after all, and that word says that my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And so I actually, in my sermon on this past Sunday, was saying that I don't understand football. And so I don't know the game. And so if you don't know the game, can you give us some tips for how is it that we can get started with doing things better when it comes to how we manage or grow our financial future?
Yeah, and I think this may be a topic further down in this conversation. But for one, you have to be around people that you trust, for one. But two, it's on my mind right now, so I'm going to express it. Typically, in minorities, in our communities, we've had bad experiences in the past, and we just don't trust another group of people to help guide us forward. And typically, from my experience, there are people willing and wanting to help, but typically when they do, there's a lot of chaos in those conversations. So they typically don't help. And from both sides, there's reason to do so. But for one, you have to be willing to risk something, right? So in Matthew, I believe the 25th book, it talks about a leader leaving his home and leaving the home to three individuals to take care of the property, and he left with them not gifts and talents, but he left with them possessions, right? And hopefully, Dr. Vaughn, you can help me out with this story. A few pieces, but with those who took a risk, right, and was able to bring a return to that master, he or she was rewarded, and those who didn't, they were punished. Now, I'm not expressing that God's punishing us, but a lot of us in the Black and brown community do not take risks because we either are afraid, we're unwilling to reach out, unwilling to receive rejection, because rejection is tough to deal with, and as a result, certain things that could happen do not happen. And I believe the way the system is set up, at least here in America, you have to take risks to achieve something. And normally in our communities, we are unwilling to take that risk. That's probably a heavy judgment, but that's what I commonly see.
And I think that you touched on perhaps what really is one of the reasons that you mentioned. Grandmothers still hide the money in the mattress. There's a knowledge piece and there's a risk piece, and so I would assume that you help folks actually have the knowledge to make informed risks. And the parable that you were referencing is over there in Matthew 25 with the talents. So one guy got 5 talents, one got 2, one got 1, and the guy with the 1, he went and buried his, and he said it's because I was afraid that I would lose your money, and it didn't work out too well for him. And I think the same is true for us today when we actually sit on our talents, be they financial or otherwise. So that was a really timely pointer that you just gave us. I'm going to prepare to segue to my co-host Lango Deen, but before I do, one more interesting question. All of us have had our worlds impacted over the course of the last 10 or so months by the global pandemic. We are experiencing something, as you know, that folks haven't experienced in a century. And it's kind of an interesting question from the financial perspective. Have you seen any trends, whether positive or negative, in people's financial habits coming out of what we've been under over the course of most of this year?
Yeah, I mean, the statistics have expressed that there's been more flow of money from a lower income segment of folks into the stock markets and speculating on investments, right? So they're opening an E-Trade account and they're penny trading, or they're forex trading, or they're buying options and trying to risk some savings to hopefully make more. The wealthier folks, obviously they already had savings, so they're taking advantage of certain companies. But there is a shift within our country from an economic perspective to where more. So normally we would have expected GDP to stay where it was around the end of March, about down 31% or so. We would have thought that would have been elongated, but folks, because of the stimulus in April, and because of the access to credit, folks have shifted, from going to the restaurants and spending money on, steaks at the best restaurant, steakhouse or something, to spending more money on their house, developing their house. So you're seeing companies like a Lowe's, do very well in this market environment. Obviously, my wife and I, we shop like crazy online. So we've seen a lot of technology companies do extremely well, but also the technology behind those companies are doing extremely well. So you're just seeing a shift of money from like the traditional brick and mortars. You're seeing, Macy's and normal malls, closed down, but you're seeing more activity online. Amazon is putting forth this amazing platform. They launched it like 3 years ago, but they're giving access to individuals to run a route for Amazon. So Amazon is trying to replace, the UPS and the postal services of taking care of the orders. They're trying to give you that 1-day service. So there are shifts happening. Some folks, obviously, this virus has been a rich man's virus, unfortunately. Rich folks are able to stay home. They don't have to risk going to work or into the office or into Walmart and be around a lot of people. And they're taking advantage of, the stock market and other markets out there. But there's been a humongous shift. If you own property in real estate, you should be doing very well right now, and at least the value of your equity that we mentioned before. But there's definitely a shift to more technology, and on the political space, we're starting to entertain more like the universal basic income conversation, because there's going to be a massive shift. A lot of folks don't want to relearn something, right? So it's going to be a new world coming out of this. It's not going to be normal. And the unemployment rates may be where they are currently for quite some time. We shall see.
Got it. That's a very good place for us to segue and talk about career and pipeline. I do have a few other questions that we may get a chance to loop back to, but I'm going to hand things over to Lango Deen at this time. How are you, Lango?
I'm much better, Dr. Vaughn. Had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Hope you did too.
Yeah, we did, and I'm glad that you are doing so much better.
You're listening to High Tech Sunday, featuring Dr. Mark Vaughn, Lango Deen, and our special guest, wealth advisor, Davyd Jones. This week's episode is brought to you by the BEYA STEM Conference. Now, a word from our sponsor.
When you come to BEYA, you get to see that there's so many doing great things. It is building the next generation that's going to take our place, the next generation that's going to take us to Mars, the next generation that's going to explore the deeps of the ocean. That's what BEYA is all about. Building on what we're going to be, not just next year, but for the next 50 years. Our charge as current BEYA participants is to ensure that we have future BEYA participants. Diversity of thought brings diversity of new products, brings diversity of new ideas, diversity that's going to allow us to do the next generation things. I want them to mentor. I want them to take the chance and tell a young man or tell a young lady, this is how your resume should look if it's not looking great. Or your resume is looking great, but let me pull you in closer and make sure that you don't fall off the trap. If your budget will allow you to bring 20, next year bring 30. If your budget says 30, next year bring 50. This is a one-of-a-kind type of place. They will never get this experience. Just tonight, if our students were here, if your students was here from a university, they're rubbing shoulder with flag officers. They're rubbing shoulder with SEC or SES officers. They're rubbing shoulders with the top echelon within our military. Where do you get that opportunity? I'm impressed to do that. After a 30-something year career, I'm impressed to see these individuals keep coming back. We're now 30 plus years doing BEYA. We want to ensure that we want to do that 30 plus years and more. Make sure you spread the word. Let someone else know about exactly what you saw this weekend, because what you saw, you'll see nowhere else.
Again, this week's episode is brought to you by the BEYA STEM Conference. Now, back to the show.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Vaughn. Well, welcome, Mr. Jones. It's a pleasure to have you here. A couple of years ago, we had Deborah Owens. I know you know who she is. And we did an article on her for, I think it was Women of Color magazine. So I think this is great. It's quite a scoop that we have the male version of Deborah Owens with us today. But I'm going to take you back now. As Dr. Vaughn said earlier, this is the Korean pipeline section. So what I want to do is imagine yourself as a high school student today, and you're about to enter Ball State University, and you're about to join the College of Business, and you have majors like accounting, business administration, business analytics, computer information systems, economics, finance, um, what else? Mathematical economics. Which direction would you go if you want to start off as a financial advisor and then move your way up to where you are now as a wealth advisor?
So, believe it or not, my business, Ms. Lango, is mostly human, meaning I'm getting to know people and I am convincing them that I can be of value to them. And that's really a trust thing. It's understanding behaviors more than anything. In regards to if I'm entering into the College of Business at Ball State and I want to be in this financial world, I will be looking more at data. So right now you have a lot of companies, gathering a lot of data on everyone out there, everything you do. If I am a young adult and I'm trying to understand how to navigate this future world, I'm going to look at how can I best interpret all this data that is being gathered, and be able to put together analysts of that data and portray that to any company out there. Meaning, I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I have access to a database of information from all the folks who live here in Fort Wayne, and they all shop at Target this time of the year, et cetera, et cetera. If I can understand data and portray that to a company, I will fare very well in the future economy because everything's gathering data, and we're trying to understand how to best use that data. If you want to get in the field of financial planning and wealth management, obviously you should understand stocks and bonds and equities. I should definitely understand economics and understanding macroeconomics and microeconomics. But what I do is really a human thing, understanding humans, behaviors from humans, and trying to connect with people. If I'm a young person coming into this field of finance and I don't want to be a CPA, right, where I can read a company's balance sheets and cash flow statements and help them save money, based off the current tax laws, then you should really, really, really dig deep in understanding data and financial modeling for sure.
Okay, so from what I'm hearing, it's like a business analytics major would be a good way to go.
Oh yeah,
Right,
1000%.
okay. Because you emphasize data a lot, and I'm thinking that, okay, so getting to know databases, not just, Excel, you just put in a lot of information in there and not understand, but really understanding, sort of trying to make sense of that information and how that can create profit for your company or for somebody else's. That would be the way to go. Is that what you're saying?
100%. I mean, similar to what Obama did, when he won his second term, and what the Trump administration did when they squeezed out his first presidency. They really understood data and they really target marketed folks, right? And it worked out to their benefit. That's not going to go away. So in finance, that same thing is happening. So if you want to be on the Main Street side, so for me, I'm talking to regular day folks. That's the Main Street. But if you want to do a different career path, data analytics is very, very important. and understanding how people are spending and consuming, buying and consuming things in the future.
Okay. Um, I turn now to really a critical question, and that is the importance of representation in this field. And I'm going to quote someone I'm sure you know, James Brewer. He's the former vice president of the Association of African American Financial Advisors. And he said that diversity brings different ideas and mindsets. He also said that he came to it because he loved like you said, loved understanding money. And he also said that minority financial advisors bring an empathy to the industry. But the problem is when investment news, which I'm sure you know about, ranked the best places to work for financial advisors, of the 50 firms that they showed, not one of them featured a single Black face. So if you have only 1,200 Blacks as certified financial planners or advisors, what do you recommend? What are you telling young people to do? What should young people do?
That's a very interesting question. It's a question that folks are trying to solve. And I'm going to go back to where I mentioned before. It's about education and entrepreneurship. It's very normally, so even in my book of business, only maybe 5% of the folks I'm a steward of are African American or Black. 95% of the folks that have given me trust to manage their wealth are white or of a different race, right? And normally, you work with people, who look like you, right? So within the Black community, the reason why a lot of Blacks aren't familiar with what we do, they may think of an insurance agent or something, is because normally in the Black community, you don't have a large group of people talking about their stock portfolio or their investment portfolio, right? They'll maybe discuss their real estate portfolio, which is what we understand that more because we can see it, right? It's very difficult for us to connect from a community perspective an investment that we can't see or touch and we have less control over. So that's a tough conversation, or at least tough answer to actually answer because there's not much Black wealth out there. So to see the representation of Blacks is very difficult because a lot of folks aren't from it, right? I kind of stumbled into this career, right? If my former teammate didn't expose me to this industry, I may have, been selling homes, real estate, right? And I might not even had a brokerage account. So an objective for me is, and just like James, we have to be ultra successful, but we also have to reach back and create a pathway for folks who look like us to enter into this career and to thrive in it, because it's very difficult to get started in this career without any help. And the only way for you to get help is if you have folks who have a lot of money and savings. And normally in our community, you may have one or two folks in a church, who have a lot of money, a couple $100,000 or something. But typically that's not going to keep you afloat for a life in this business. So part of that answer is we have to play the long game and create economics and build equity, build wealth in our community. And as we're building wealth, we will expose more folks in that community to what it means to manage wealth, what tools are out there to manage wealth. And as we get more aware of those tools, then they'll say, okay, we can manage those tools for you, and which is exactly what I do. Does that answer that question, or is it kind of a loaded answer?
No, it does. So you basically you're saying that we're supposed to be doing two things at the same time. So how can a young person interested in finance and economics prepare for career in finance? That's one. And whilst they're making those preparations, what 3 tips would you give to those young people to help them develop the good money habits early, that you've talked about, as they step into adulthood?
So the three tips I would express to young folks is, for one, start saving as early as possible, and read as many financial books as you can. There's a lot of podcasts out there. You just type in wealth management, or YouTube, stock portfolios, and just start. I mean, there's in 2020, there's really no reason you can't find an answer to a question you have, right? And the young kids today have enormous amount of access to that. It's just really trying to understand what questions to ask these tools we have out there, right? So for one, start saving as early as you can. And if you're exposing yourself to the stock market, pick one company that you shop at often, or your mom shops at often, like Walmart or Kroger, right? And buy a share of that company. Now you own part of that company. And now when you own part of that company, now you will be exposed to their board of directors, and what they're trying to achieve. You have access to their cash flow statements, their balance sheets, their income statements, and you will start to understand how this company is making money, and then you can go forward from there.
And my last question before I turn it back to Dr. Vaughn is, what do you like most about your career? You've talked about financial intelligence, you've talked about stocks and bonds, you talked about wealth building and the importance of it. You've talked about data, the importance of data and analytics at this time. You talked about so many things. So what do you like best about your career? And financial intelligence, why is it such an important area of focus?
So I'll answer the first piece first, and then I'll kind of end on financial intelligence. Hopefully I remember, and bring it back if I don't. But either you or Dr. Vaughn mentioned before, no, you did, why James mentioned we do well in this career is because normally we do show more empathy. And for me, I can't tell you the countless stories. I'll give you one. So a really good friend of mine, who's become a good friend of mine, we met over 3 years ago. And this might tie to you too, Dr. Vaughn. This is a very biblical story. 3 years ago, this business owner in town, he's doing extremely well with his businesses. We meet and we have a good conversation, and it's all about our faith and connecting with God, and that's how we connected, more like brothers in Christ. And then it got to, okay, what do you do for a living? How can we help each other? And he opened up his financial picture for me to understand how I can help him. And yeah, on paper, he was worth a couple $1 million on paper, but most of that was in assets. And in those assets, the banks, had loans, right? So he still owed the bank a lot of money. And the story of Joseph and Joseph's vision really came to mind when I was talking to this specific person. And the story was, look, you're going to have, a few years of prosperity followed by a few years of famine. And if you don't save during those years of prosperity, those years of famine will really destroy you, right? The king had a vision. Joseph interpreted that vision for the king. The king took heed to Joseph, put him in control over the grain and everything, and stored up a lot. And the years of prosperity came and went, and famine came. And when famine came, obviously, Joseph and the kingdom did extremely well. That same story is what I presented to this at this time was a prospect who's now a client and a friend of mine 3 years ago. I said, look, I can take your money and invest your money, and I can grow in the stock market. And maybe this is another conversation for another day, but the stock market is going to have its ebbs and flows. I believe from an economic perspective, we are at the peak of the overall market cycle, meaning we're closer to a contraction than we are years of prosperity. You should be storing up wealth and saving your money because there's going to be something, typically every 10 years, something bad happens. And you don't have any savings to weather a storm, right? So 3 years ago, I could have got a sell, could have made some money, could have had a client 3 years ago. But I gave him this message. He took that message. I didn't open an account. I didn't make any money from him. Fast forward 3 years, COVID-19 happens. Who would have predicted it would have been COVID that happened, right? Well, he owns restaurants, right? Restaurants and hospitality, that's the area that got hit the worst, right? A lot of companies shut their doors, had to shut their doors, right? He didn't, because he saved, and he saved like crazy, right? And not only is his door still open to one of the best restaurants here in town, but he was able to grow his wealth during this pandemic, right? So he was able to invest based off those savings, okay? So you ask me, why am I doing this? To me, it's more spiritual, because I feel connected to helping guide folks and giving folks honest opinions. And I have, my masters to help guide me in understanding, markets, and, understanding cash flow statements, and, where to position your money along them. So all that stuff is fun, and that's my job to understand. But just like Dr. Vaughn is a pastor, his job is to fully understand the Bible in the context of which he believes God is portraying to him. But he's not going to preach the Bible down, the folks' throats. No, he has to convey to them so that they are able to receive the word of God and live a life. So that's how I kind of see it. My dad was a pastor. Typically, someone's life based off of 3 stools: faith, finance, and health. If one of those stools is not sturdy, your life is out of balance. I can't envision standing on a pulpit. I'll leave that to Dr. Vaughn and my late father. I love working out, but I get really bored training folks. But when it comes to wealth, it really drives me to give folks good advice and let folks know there's people out there that do really care about you. And you said financial intelligence, is that right, Lango?
Yes, Mr. Jones, yes.
What was the question around financial intelligence?
The question about financial intelligence is why it's such an important area of focus. But I think you've kind of touched on that with faith, with family, with finance and health, and that you can save your way to wealth. Based on the example you gave us about your friend who, the hospitality industry, restaurants took a major hit during the pandemic, but because he was wise to save for years before, this major disruption, he was able to bail himself out. He didn't need to go to a bank. He was able to bail himself out and keep his business afloat. So
yeah, he didn't have to bail himself out, Lango. He was able to thrive during this market, kept his employees on payroll, right?
Major difference, right? Major difference. Major difference.
Right, is what I was trying to reference. Life is, as young adults, and I know this is aimed at some young folks, we want to speed up the process of success. And typically, if you're not from wealth and you don't have wealth, you have to take the time to build it. You have to. You can cheat your way through it, and some people get lucky. And by cheating, I'm talking about doing illegal things that are legal now. And you may get lucky doing so, but normally the right way of doing it is hard work and creating a plan and executing that plan as best as you can. And it takes time. The story I just gave you was a 3-year story, right? It just takes time. And young folks truly have to understand, when you're building wealth and you're trying, the house I grew up in sold a few years ago for $700, right? I'm the first of my family to graduate college. That takes time, right? It doesn't happen overnight. And the younger generation, and I'm the same way. I want to shorten the learning curve as much as quick as possible. But we have to understand, when you are creating wealth, it takes time. But along the way, you have to create the right habits, because you may be making $2,000 a month now, but if you're spending $2,100 a month now, it doesn't matter if you're making $10, $20, $30, $40,000 a month. If your habits are the same, your income may go up. You may have a bigger house and bigger car, travel the world or whatever, but you won't have any wealth. You won't have anything to pass on to your kids and your community.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. when you're creating wealth, it takes time, but along the way, create some good habits. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Mr. Jones.
Yep.
Turning it back now to Dr. Vaughn. Dr. Vaughn?
Thanks a lot, Lango. I have just been enjoying this exchange, and I love the headline that you just captured, Lango, that it takes time, but it's worth it. I've got a ton of questions on my mind, Mr. Jones, but we don't have a ton of time. So I'm just going to ask one and then see if I can get you to do something that most folks are a little nervous about, and that is just plugging yourself. We want to know how people can get in touch with you if you would like for them to be able to. So the question is, as you and Lango were speaking about young people and finance and possibly getting involved in this particular enterprise, it is certainly the case that kids these days are extremely tech savvy. And so could you share your thoughts on the apps that are coming more and more into popularity, especially with younger people, Stash, Acorn, Robinhood, those kinds of things as tools for investment and for even learning the market? You got any thoughts about that?
In regards to the apps, I would advocate taking full advantage of those type of platforms, because those platforms are teaching you habits that's just normally hard to teach, right? So normally, if a client comes to me and there's no savings, we just start a savings plan, right? It's very boring. What I do is I bore people to wealth. It's very boring, but over years of time, they build a habit of saving a percentage of their income per month, right? So they're getting used to living off of a certain budget, you're right. So those apps that allow you to, Acorn. I don't like giving plugs to certain apps, but like Acorn or whatever those other apps, those apps are really just giving you or helping you develop a habit, and habits over the long term just become part of your life. And in regards to saving and accumulating wealth, you want to create those kind of habits. So I'm always going to advocate the younger folks to do so. If you don't feel comfortable opening up an app, definitely open up like an E-Trade account, Scottrade account, call someone like myself, call me. And hopefully that person or I can really connect with you and help put you on a savings plan, because the first part of it is the saving. And the reason why I say that is because you can be saving for a whole year, $100 a month, and now you have $1,200 saving in the stock market, and then COVID happens, and 30% of your savings is down on paper, right? So you look at your statement, let's use easy math, you put $1,000 in the stock market. Now the value of your statement is saying $700, right? And let's say you've also lost your job during that time frame, and you want to use some of that money to get you through a month on a bill or something. Now you're selling an asset at a discount, right? But if you had a savings account, then you would be able to weather the storm from a personal perspective, personal living perspective. You got to still pay your bills, but also you should have a little bit excess left over to buy what was once valued at $100 at $70. So now you're taking advantage of that system, of that cycle. That makes sense?
Absolutely, yes.
So the first thing you got to do is save. It's the most boring way to start. But if you save, now you're building. If you have never saved before, you have to build that habit of saving, and then go forward from there. There's plenty of books. The book folks, especially young kids, should read is The Millionaire Next Door. It's the most boring book in the world, but I can't tell you how many millionaires I've helped that pull up in a Ford 250. It's amazing. And typically, if I have a new client, they pull up and a very expensive Mercedes Benz or something, I'm like, yeah, they probably don't have that much extra cash to actually invest, because everything's going into how they look and be perceived. And a lot of kids out there are trying to be perceived positively by a lot of poor people. It's just backwards to me. It's extremely backwards. So we have to change our mindset on creating wealth, be diligent, create habits, understand it's going to take time. And in time, good things do happen. If you speed at that time, you are exposing yourself to more risk than you may be willing to accept. And there's a lot of data behind that, but I'm not going to bore you with more data.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. Really quickly, you mentioned people who might want to have the opportunity to connect with an expert. So can you tell us, is there a website that you might be able to share with us? Or if people want to follow you, Instagram, Facebook, give yourself a plug.
Yep. So my email is David, and my name is spelled uniquely. I'm a unique person. It's DAVYD.Jones@edwardjones.com. I'm on LinkedIn you can find me Davyd Jones. You can find me on LinkedIn. And those are usually the best forms of communication for me. My office phone is 260-436-2656.
Thank you so much. Well, there you have it, everybody. We have enjoyed this conversation with Mr. Davyd Jones, financial expert, and so much more here on High Tech Sunday, and hope that you will avail yourself of the knowledge that he laid on us. We've been talking a lot about being woke these days. You have helped us get a little more woke in the terms of wealth and equity, and we certainly appreciate that. Going to hand it back over to Brandon Newby at this time, who's going to lead us out. Thanks again.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of High Tech Sunday. Career Communication Group's High Tech Sunday looks at professional development and technology through the lens of spiritual philosophies. In a time when digital information is more critical than ever, this weekly program is produced by and for CCG's community of alumni and professionals in science, technology, engineering, and math fields. The community runs from national thought leaders to aspiring students, and this weekly series aims to bring a concentrated discussion around technological advancements and achievements based on universal moral principles. The 1-hour podcast will be streamed every Sunday. The podcast can be accessed through the BEYA Facebook page, Women of Color Facebook page, and CCG YouTube page, in addition to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Podbean, and Spotify. Please join us next time.